Bonsoir à toutes et à tous. Je suis très
Good
heureux
evening, everyone. I'm very glad to present this virtual but real panel about literary adaptations in films, and we have directors and writers who have been together on film adaptation. Literary adaptation is as old as cinema itself. Le Voyage dans la Lune, Jules Verne's novel, was turned into a film by Méliès. How does a director choose a book that he wants to adapt, he or she wants to adapt to cinema? And how does a writer accept to let his world, his imaginary creatures, between the hands of another creator? We're going to ask these questions to Laurent, the director. Good evening. You made the adaptation of Le Petit Nicolas, 5.5 million people saw it in France, and now you've just done the adaptation of the speech that was part of Cannes selection and should be released in December. We also have Danielle Arbid. Good evening. After Peur de Rien, that won the prize of the Lumière Academy. And then she directed an opera, and now it's Patience, Simple Passion, Annie Ernaux's film that you adapted, and it's supposed to be released on January 6th if cinemas open. Fingers crossed. And the third director that we have is Jessica Palud. Good evening. We can't hear you. Yes, hi Jessica. You started as an AD for Bernardo Bertolucci and Sofia Coppola, and here your first feature film is the adaptation of Serge Joncour's film that is called, the film is called Back Home, and it won the best screenplay at Venice Film Festival. And the writer, Serge Joncour, of the book you adapted is here, and he received a Femina Prize just yesterday for Human Nature, his last novel. We can't hear you, Serge. I'm sorry, my mic was off. You must be a happy man tonight. Of course, being given a prize is something. Usually there is a gala, a party, a crowd, and I was on my own. So we are at your place now. Yes, I'm at home, not in a bookshop. Well, no, now we don't go to bookshops anymore. I have to stay at home to meet people. I'm saying that because in half an hour you'll have to leave us. You'll still be at home, but you're going to a virtual bookshop to meet your readers. Your books have been adapted a few times. One of your first books that was published at La Dilettante, then there was Superstar, that was an adaptation of Idol, a novel, and now Back Home, Jessica Palud is also a rural drama that has a brilliant casting with Nils Schneider and Adela Gratzopoulos, and it's the story of a young man who goes back to the farm that he left as a kid, and now 12 years after he goes back and he meets Louise, who's the widow of his younger brother and her child. So that's the story of the novel as you wrote it, but I would to know what was your reaction when you saw the film. I was moved. because in this novel, I always hide behind my characters. But there is a lot of things that I have experienced that I put in my stories, even if it's understated. But people around me know that there are parts of my own lives, of my parents, of my own memories. So it's very moving to see them in a film. What's also interesting is the way a writer sees the adaptation of his own book. I know that if I was a director, I would be very scared to adapt my own book. I wouldn't be able to do it. It's too hard. So I wonder, Jessica, how was it? Was it also scary for you to take this responsibility, to take somebody else's creation and give your view on it? Of course, it is very impressive to show your film for the first time, because Serge was one of the first viewers of my film. And I know that the story was very personal to him. So that's a bit tricky, because we try to be very close to the film, but as soon as you adapt it, you also betray it. So it's always difficult to find a balance. It's a different character, a different situation. There is a common ground, but then I have created other situations and the character has evolved. So of course, his feedback is very important for me, and I was so relieved to see that he liked the film and he was moved by it. To be more precise, Serge, what moved you when you saw this film? Maybe the fact and the characters that you had imagined. I was talking about mental images. I imagine that you put faces on the characters that you write, and now you see them played by other actors. I guess you didn't pick up the actors who were going to embody your characters. So how did you feel when you saw that somebody else would take your baby away and give other images? Well, it's quite relieving for me, because a novel is something quite long to carry on and to write. But what aspects in the film, what scenes or what characters you found more striking? I think the strongest point is the kid, this child, this, because the son, the older son who's left, for me, in my novel, he came back 15 years after, but he is, as they are younger, it's a bit less. But there is this break. The son comes back and he discovers this kid. He expected to see his aged parents, and he discovers this 5-6-year-old child. I was about to call the film The Sun Child. And he's the one who brings life to all these grown-ups. And that's really the heart of the book. So then the faces are different, the decors are different. And this child, maybe he doesn't look like the one that you had in mind. Oh, this kid is wonderful. He's got so much vitality and such a strong character. So he doesn't exactly have the same face, but the same energy. And that was quite disconcerting. Then we're going to talk to Laurent and Danielle. But Jessica, how did you come up with the idea of adapting this novel? Was it because it was his writing, or was there a specific reason? Did you discover the book yourself, or were you referred by someone else to do it? It's a friend who made me discover Serge. I didn't know him. I started to read his books and I fell in love with his writing and with his sensitivity. All these very subtle ways of approaching stories. And in this book, specifically, I'm very interested in the way he describes this rural life, this isolated countryside, and these people who leave them and decide to open up to the world and travel. And that's what at the heart of the novel, and I was really touched by it. And then writing is a very long process also for me. It took me 5 years. Did you consider writing with him, or you had to get rid of him to feel free? No, I didn't want to get rid of him. We did work together at some point. But then as I went on writing, I had to take my distance because I think it's very tough for a writer, for the writer of the book to let the book go. And I needed to take some distance. I think a good adaptation is also one that takes its distance with the original book, and it took me time to do it. The first version that I wrote was quite close to the novel, and then I made it my own. The characters became younger because it was closer to me. So I brought more of my own view on it, my own grasp of it, and maybe something about this farmers' distress that I wanted to put in it. So you have to, you take the book and then you have to put drama in it, you have to put many more aspects, because sometimes a book can be very interesting. The story might really interest you, and then realize that it's not made for a film. So to make it a film, you have to add other elements to it. Serge, did you feel betrayed, as Jessica was saying, that you have to accept the idea of betrayal? Did you feel betrayed when you saw the film? No, I must say yes, but it's at the same time what I expected, because if I just wanted to see the book on a screen, I'd rather read the book. What I found interesting to see how someone else was going to make it hers. So making a film is also a human adventure. It took us, we started in 2012, so it took us 6-7 years. And so I went out of the adventure because I felt that Jessica needed to be on her own. She changed producers, Philippe Lioré came on board. And I also had to cheat on her on a way because I started working on other projects. I felt guilty because I let her really get by with it on her own, but that's what it is. Making a film is a long process that is at times happy, at times conflictual and difficult. With whom, for instance? With Jessica, you mean there was a conflict, or with other directors? Not Jessica, but the producer is somebody I didn't have good feelings about, and I'm quite instinctive. So with Thibaut, the third producer with whom she was, we would spend hours talking, the three of us. And then when she changed producers, I let Jessica go her own way because I really trusted her. She had made the first a kind of feature film called Closed Eyes, Les Yeux Fermés that was very close to my novel. So I really trusted her, and I was curious to see what she was going to do. And for years, I thought that it wasn't going to happen. And do you enjoy being adapted? It's not the first time. As I said, there was Gilles Paquet-Brenner, generally other directors who'd done this. Do you like this experience of someone else coming, taking your creation and make what they want with it, because once you give the rights away, you have no link with what your book is going to become. No, but sometimes you can have a relation with a director, with a producer. Xavier Giannoli is a character. When you go and have a drink with him, you see how his very this colorful and very worried character that he is, and but it's also the producers. Producers are characters. Men or women, they really have to be strong. They must have no fear to be exposed to all kinds of dangers, all the money aspects and the risk that they have. You have to be crazy to be a producer, to be accept to take the plunge of adapting a novel or even an original story, to manage all technical. Look at my lighting tonight, how awful it is. It took me the afternoon to have it. Yeah, I wonder, it's like you were hiding. Yes, I look like Colin Cruz at the end of Apocalypse Now. Yes, but is it a pleasure for you at the end, or is it kind of trauma to see the result? Of course not. She went to Venice. Jessica went to Venice. She took me to the Mostra. It's wonderful. I'm very grateful for that. Laurent Tirard, what Serge was saying, that you must be crazy to decide to adapt a novel. You adapted the speech, Fab Caro's novel. This guy who the last thing he needed is to be asked to deliver a speech at his sister's wedding, whereas he's completely heartbroken. You had already adapted Le Petit Nicolas, which is Sampé's book, a classic. So is it true that you have to be crazy to decide to adapt a novel? Or on the opposite, it's easier because there's a whole world that's pre-existing? I think you must be crazy to make a film anyway. Why? Well, you must be a bit lighthearted and not be aware of all the dangers you have ahead, because it's quite an adventure on many levels. As for the adaptation, it's true that Le Petit Nicolas was my first adaptation. Before being a director, I was a writer, a screenwriter. And I thought at the time that I would always write my own scripts. But then I came up with this project of Le Petit Nicolas, and everybody told me it's impossible. People around me, professionals, everybody said there has been many projects trying to adapt Le Petit Nicolas, and it's impossible. But it was quite a challenge. The more they tell you it's impossible, and of course, the more you want to do it. But then is it easier because there's already a basis? In a way, yes, it's true. Is that you don't have this blank page to. But then for Le Petit Nicolas, it's very difficult because millions of readers have read this book when they were kids, and now there are high expectations. The writer at the time was already dead, but then all the readers have expectations that you can't. But Serge Joncour too has readers. Yes, but as you were asking if it was a betrayal, it's not just for the author, but also all the readers, especially for Le Petit Nicolas, because it's something related to people's childhood. And so it's all the more precious for people. Did I answer your question? Yes, yes, you did. So there is some kind of pressure about this character who belongs to people's myth. And so with this novel, the speech, was there less pressure? Because Fab Caro is not here with us tonight, but he's also a comic book writer. He wrote one novel 10 years ago, and this was his second novel, but he's more famous as a comic book writer and illustrator, and especially Zai Zai Y, which is the graphic novel that he has been, there has been 5 or 6 projects to try and adapt it. And as I loved whatever he did, I met with him very often. When I like somebody's work, at least internet is good for that. I find them on Facebook and I get in touch with people. And 2 years before I met him, I knew that Zai was already, the rights were already given away, and I didn't know if I would know how to adapt it, but I just told him maybe we would work together someday. And as soon as this novel came out, I called him and I said that I was going to apply for the rights. And his first reaction was, but it's not possible. How can you adapt? There's nothing you can adapt, it's just a guy talking. And I said, no, he talks about everything. So no, it wasn't any easier with Fab Caro. What was nice is that he doesn't cling to what he's written. He never got involved in writing the script. He doesn't know how to write a script. He doesn't know the method. Yes, but even if he doesn't know how to write, he could still want to control. No, he didn't want at all to be over my shoulder. He's always writing another graphic novel, another comic, so he just didn't care. And it went so quickly that he didn't. I think it came from the project itself that everything went very fast. When I read the book, I knew how to adapt it. Oh, the images came to you? Yes. It's funny because it's really like in music. When you read, there is a music that starts in your head, which is the music of the film. Is a kind of invisible music that instinctively leads you to your film, the film, that's something that comes to my ear and I just play it by ear. A kind of tonality. And usually it takes me 8 to 10 months to write an original script or even an adaptation. It's quite long generally. This time it took me only 2 months. This had never happened to me before. It was a mix of method and instinct. Oh, Serge has to go now. Yes, Serge is off. Would you like to say a last word before leaving us? Is there another book of yours that's been adapted now? Yes, my novel, which is called Repose-toi en moi, Rely on Me, that might be adapted. Film du Trésor is the producer, but I don't know what they're up to. Okay, they might let us know. Yeah, it's a latte. And are you going to rely on them or are you going to work in the writing process? Congratulations for your Femina Prize. Beautiful novel, rural once again. Thank you, bye-bye. Danielle Arbid, we're also at home with you, your place. So your novel is not Goscinny, but it's just as intimidating because Simple Passion by Annie Ernaux. So the film is supposed to be released in January, fingers crossed. It's an autobiography by Annie Ernaux of a, a forbidden passion between a woman and a married foreigner. It starts with this beautiful sentence that says, after September, I did nothing else than waiting for a man to call me and to come to my home. What was the trigger for you? Laurent Tirard was saying that it was a music that he would hear when he read the novel. In your case, what made you feel that you wanted to adapt this novel to turn it into a different artistic object? A producer offered me to shoot a film that would be about bodies, that would deal with bodies with some sexual aspect. And then I didn't want to write the story myself, so I started thinking about a novel to adapt. I had read Simple Passion, and it was one of the books that I would really keep close and to give it as a gift to many of my friends who would fall in love, because I thought it was really beautiful book to read. And at the time I would always think that it was just a book that was not adaptable, impossible to make a film out of a woman who's waiting. It's not the love story itself, it's a report about love story. It's the memory of a love story, but written as a report, very accurately, with many details, a kind of inventory that Georges Perec made. That's her description of a passion. And the way Annie Ernaux writes is that she uses herself to say what can happen to the other, to the reader, as if she's a lab phenomenon, a lab pig, guinea pig that is used to be able to touch the reader. And so that's the story of this woman who falls in love with this man who's the exact opposite of her, a man who cares about fancy suits and big cars, and quite a shallow man, which is the opposed to the kind of woman that she is, who's very intellectual and sophisticated. She falls in love with this man and keeps waiting, just as Jeanne Dillman, Chantal Ackerman's character waits. But there are films about waiting. Why not? Was it because it was her waiting that you thought it can't be adapted, or was it because of the style of Annie Ernaux that you thought maybe, why would I put it into images, whereas there's a whole world of her writing and her style? As Laurent said, it was because it was a challenge. It was difficult. And you have to be unconscious in a way, and instead of gambling, you would rather make films. I was trying to find a pure love story with sex, that sex would be present in the love story, not just a fantasy. It was really one aspect that was very sensual and sexual. She wrote another book called Se Perdre, which is more about the sexual aspect, but my film is a sexual one. And it's about these moments. So you did two in one, both Se Perdre and no, I didn't use the other book, but I imagined them myself, the sexual parts. There is one trend of literature that's really based on sad writing, which is about the experience of love on the very physical aspect. And love, there is also another side that is more the social aspect of love, betrayals and separations and love affairs. It's one or the other, but I couldn't find one book that would be about pure love story from the beginning to the end without having uh, extra aspects, whereas Annie Ardot just does that. She just deals with the love story. And did you hear the music Laurent was talking about, this tone that you could make you understand from the beginning how you would make it? I took the book like an empty flat in which I had to choose the furniture because the book is so minimal. First, it takes place in the late 80s, and she keeps waiting on by a landline phone, whereas my character has a mobile phone, so she can move around. That's why I was referring to Jeanne Dillman. So she has the mobile phone, but she also has a son, she has a friend, she has a profession. So I took some liberties with the character, also because Annie Ernaux allowed me to do all this. She was so generous that and so humble that that's really her attitude that made it possible for me. I didn't want it to be just a gesture of admiration. I did admire her, but because she was very noble, not because she was successful or acknowledged. Yes, you said the question of the author accepting is important because it means that the writer, you said she accepted. I mean, do you need to have her agreement? Oh, is it a question? Well, she read the script twice, and once there were some of the sequences that she didn't accept. She said, I like it, but there are 3 moments that are tiny, tiny details, but she's a very precise woman. And she said there were some aspects, once you mentioned shame, and I never felt shame. I said, yes, but I won't take them out because that's how I see it. But finally, I didn't put it in the film, so she was probably right, but I still shot it. I wrote it and I shot it and I didn't use it eventually. So yes, I took my distance too. Jessica, do you also feel that you have to take your distance with the presence of the writer? You happen to have adapted a living writer. Do you needed his Did you need his agreement or no? You well, we started working together, but very quickly he went out of the process because it didn't work the way we did it together because we were too close to the book and I felt trapped in a way. There is a basis. What Danielle said is beautiful. There is a basis. You choose the walls and then you have to inhabit it. And so you do it with yourself. And so you change things. The things evolve naturally. Now I'm working on another adaptation because I'm writing 2 films and one of them is again an adaptation. What is it? Vanessa Schneider's book, which is called You Were Called Maria Schneider. And I met Vanessa Schneider, the writer. A year ago, I met her when I was editing back home. And she had met with many people, several people who wanted to adapt the book. And what I told her is that what I love in her book is the portrayal of Maria Schneider, but she's also talking about herself, about her own relationship to Maria Schneider, the actress. And what was interesting for me is not the vision of the little girl, but the portrayal of Maria Schneider. So, but it's still an adaptation.
C'est quand même sa cousine, elle raconte des choses quand même qui sont
Because she's
extrêmement
her
intimes.
cousin and
Et,
she tells very
et
private.
puis j'avais besoin, voilà, je trouvais ça bien d'avoir l'accord de quelqu'un qui a été proche de Maria. Quoi. Je trouvais ça honnête aussi d'aller jusqu'au bout de ça. Ouais. Et, mais voilà, en tous les cas, je lui ai dit honnêtement, dès le premier rendez-vous, ce que je voulais en faire. Et finalement, c'est ça qu'elle a accepté. Donc, je crois qu'il faut, oui, il faut être assez honnête. Et pour parler de Serge, Serge, il a lu finalement la version de casting, de tournage, quoi, de financement. Et après, il a découvert le film fini. Donc, il n'a même pas suivi le montage. Donc, il a découvert le film qui partait en festival, quoi.
Donc, voilà, mais c'est sympa, vous l'avez invité quand même. Laurent, ce que disaient Jessica et Danielle sur cet aspect d'affranchissement par rapport à l'auteur, par rapport à la création de l'auteur, faire un film, c'est aussi oublier qu'au départ, il y a quelqu'un qui a écrit l'histoire et c'est finalement se dire que l'histoire est à nous.
Alors, moi, j'ai vécu deux expériences très, très, très différentes. Puisque le petit Nicolas, même si René Goscinny était décédé, le petit Nicolas, il y a sa fille Anne, qui est la garante de l'esprit de l'œuvre de son père, et qui, elle, au contraire, est très, très vigilante et très présente. Et ça a été très clair dès le départ que si le projet se faisait, il se ferait avec elle et avec un regard, j'ai envie de dire, de chaque instant. Et quand je dis très présente, c'est-à-dire qu'on a eu des réunions où c'était quasiment au mot près. Non, ce mot ne rentre pas dans l'esprit de l'œuvre de mon père. Voilà. Et donc, dans un projet comme ça, il faut trouver les interstices, parce qu'il y a toujours des espaces de liberté, bien sûr. Bon, ils étaient... Voilà, mais là, on parle vraiment d'interstices où on peut mettre un peu de soi. Et curieusement, malgré toutes ces contraintes, c'était Serge qui parlait tout à l'heure de se cacher derrière ces personnages, j'ai quand même réussi à me cacher derrière le petit Nicolas pour parler de ma propre enfance et de ma famille, etc. Mais bon, c'était un exercice extrêmement compliqué parce qu'il fallait trouver parfois un espace de liberté qui était de quelques millimètres. Voilà.
Et pour
puis, pardon ?
L'autre expérience, vous avez...
Et l'autre, bah, c'est Fab Caro, qui n'avait pas du tout envie d'être impliqué. D'abord, il était super heureux à l'idée. C'est-à-dire que Fab a écrit beaucoup de BD, il a déjà écrit un roman, rien n'avait jamais été adapté. Et il avait envie. Lui, il ne le vivait pas du tout comme une trahison, il le vivait. Alors, c'est aussi peut-être particulier à son parcours. Fab est quelqu'un qui a été découvert sur le tard et il vit tout ce qui lui arrive depuis quelques années comme un miracle. Et donc, l'idée qu'on puisse transformer une de ses BD ou un de ses romans en film, et il trouve ça génial. Voilà. Donc, il était super à fond et surtout, il voulait pas, voilà, il voulait rien savoir, il voulait juste lire quand c'était écrit. Et puis voir quand c'était
Let
fini.
me do it, and he said, "Okay, I'll read it at the end, but with no interference of any sort." But even a writer who's very excited to have his book adapted might want to be involved. What do you prefer? Do you prefer to have the writer involved or to be completely free. It's true that Anne Goscinny is very careful about the loyalty to his father's spirit. But what do you prefer, as you had both experiences? Would you do you prefer to let rip and do whatever you want, or to have this control, which also gives you a frame? Well, it's always more comfortable not to be restrained and work freely, but both processes were interesting. But the first one was much more time consuming. You knew that I already knew that it was going to be long, that would be rewriting phrases, etc. The second one went very fast because I was left free. It's never happened to me to write a script in 2 months, but that belonged to the project, and that's what I loved about this novel, is that I really longed to make a film. I often said I would like to remake a first film. I made my first films. This is my 8th film now. But as you are more and more skilled, you have some comfort zone in your filmmaking. And I felt like taking risks again and taking the plunge, as you do for a first film, when you experiment things without knowing if it's going to work or not. And here with this book, that when you are lost in the digressions of a man's mind, that was quite a challenge. How can I keep the viewer's attention during half an hour just in a man's mind? So that was a crazy challenge, but of course I wouldn't have been able to do it with a writer who would have wanted to check everything with me. It was a very instinctive process, but if you have to justify them at every stage, it becomes something too consensual and it wouldn't work. Did Danielle see your film, Danielle? You said, did she see it? Yes, she saw it. 3 months ago, she saw it. Did she like it? It was very strange because I was sitting in the theater with her, and when she came out, she said, I forgot about myself, which is a great compliment, I think. I forgot about myself and I had very powerful feelings. So as she writes about herself, well, all writers write about themselves, but in her case, it's more directly inspired of her own life. So it was very moving to hear these words. Yes, she likes the film, she defends it, she gives interviews about it. Recently, in an interview, she said that she recognizes what is right and what is not, and she finds it right. Were you worried about the idea of her not liking your film, or you would say, well, my film is my film, even if it's based on her book, it's my, I'm not even sure if I like my film. It's very complicated, the kind of relation that you have with your films, especially when you're still so close. It takes time to really take your distance. I love the process of working with the actors, working with the crew. That was wonderful. I love Annie Ernaux, so I wanted her to like the film because I love her. Then the film is as I wanted it to be, but it's a bit special because somebody told me you have decided to to go far from the book, but finally you've gone back to it and to Annie Arnaud. But that was something that I was not conscious of. Before having some questions from the audience, I'd like to ask to the three of you, the two ladies and the gentleman, when you make a film, as you've done, based on a book, is it more your film than when it's an original script? It's my film. There is somebody who's very present behind, but I don't mind his presence. It's completely my film. I put a lot of myself in it. So it's a different object. Yes, but it's based on somebody else's work. Of course, there is an idea, there is an inspiration, but for me, it's a different object totally. It's nothing more than an inspiration. It's really based on, inspired by. Well, yes, then maybe it depends on adaptations also. Maybe in Danielle's case or in my case, these are quite intimate approaches. When you take a literature classic, maybe something different, but on this novel, there is really a different object in the film. I agree with them. I was wondering, it's good that I had time to reflect about it. Danielle said something about the novel that I found really interesting every time. Every time I always feel I'm telling the same story, which is my own story. And every time I think, okay, this time, in my first film, there was something very personal, very autobiographical. I thought, okay, in the second one, I'm going to do something totally different. That has nothing to do with me. It's going to be a period film about Molière. And once the film is made, I said, oh, it's again the same film. There is no way you can run away from it. The material that you treat always goes back to your own story that you're telling. There's nothing else that ourselves in all our films. So this poor guy who has to write a story, who has to write a speech, whereas his girlfriend left, it's your story. Well, when I read the novel, of course, I identified to the character. I could relate to this guy who feels very isolated in his own family. I always feel that because in my family, I'm the only artist. And when I read it, I thought it's me. And now when I show the film to the audience, everybody comes and says, it's my story. So it's not just me, it's everyone, it's universal. Two questions. Would you ever adapt a book from a foreign literature, or does it have to be French literature? Is it the music you were talking about is related to French language? Does it have to be French? Well, for me, there is no language issue. There are translations. Now I'm reading John Le Carré, and I have this fantasy of adapting one day. No, it's not a matter of language. It's the kind of intimacy you can have with a book, with a work. There are no borders in terms of space or time. So you can relate to a text even if it's in a different language. There is no extra. No, I also read in English, I read in Arabic. No, it's really language is not an issue for me. How about you, Jessica? Same for me. I have no borders in terms of language. It must be a story I can relate to, I'm touched by. And That's what it's about. That's what Laurent was saying. It's true that the scripts that we write, when I made Marlon my first short film, or the next film I'm writing now, it's always the same thing. There is always under the surface your own person and what touches you. But there are no borders in that. And you, Laurent, more precisely, are there a style, a question of style? Because when you read a translation, maybe there's something lost. Maybe you're more sensitive to the style of a writer here, Fabrice Caro, that you will feel this music that you hear would come more easily if it's in your own language or not? Maybe for a comedy, yes, because comedy is something that's very local. So maybe you have to relate more something of your own culture for comedy. But right now, I really think quite the opposite. One of the virtues of lockdown for me has been the fact of reading much more. I usually don't read much, and now I watch a lot of films and I read a lot of books. And I saw Mademoiselle, the Korean film. I'm not able to pronounce the name of the director. Danielle would love it because this is very sensual and sexual too. Yes, that's a beautiful film. And at the end, I see that it's adapted from a British novel. It's very interesting. A Korean director who's made the Korean film out of an English novel. So maybe it's a good way of coming out of your comfort zone. And I started reading a lot of foreign novels, Korean, Japanese. As now there are Japanese chefs who come to France to reinvent French cuisine. I think this interaction between culture is much more interesting and can help us enrich cinema instead of going on working on French writers with French subjects. Well, sometimes French writers write on subjects that are not French. Yeah, but that's just my personal reflection these days. Yeah, that's a cliche that is quite common about the French, that their films are too French, but it's not true. Another question by Pierre Filmont. What's the adaptation, what novel or what theater play, as you were talking about comedies, in the history of cinema, what adaptation of a novel or a play is your favorite? Chéreau has made a beautiful film which is called Intimity, and it's an adaptation of a book, and I find the film much more beautiful than the book of Hanif Qureishi's book, but I think it's a mixture of different books that inspired Patrice Chéreau, and it's an opera also, Warlikowski, who adapted Handel, and it's the most beautiful thing that I've seen. Do you remember the title? No, it was written by a cardinal where reason has to, sense has to win at the end, and he makes sensibility or emotions win at the end. And So the audience was very shocked that he had done it completely the opposite side. So you can change completely what's written, what was in the libretto and how he adapted it. As a reader and a viewer, you should not try and find the book that you've liked on screen, because of course you would be disappointed. How about you, Jessica? What's your favorite adaptation? That's difficult because, as you said, there were many of them, many films or adaptations of novels, and we don't necessarily know it. Even sometimes books that are quite unknown, and you realize retrospectively that the film that is based on a novel. There were much more, no, but I'm a great fan of Romeo and Juliet. It's a great classic, but it's a beautiful story, I think. And the film. What film are you talking? Baz Luhrmann's one? Yes, it's quite classic. It's a classic, but it's beautiful. And the film is offbeat. Now, if I have the answer, it's L'oratorio e il trionfo del tombo del Disegano by Valikovsky. That's the title we were looking for. So it's time now to finish. One last question before saying goodbye. It's even if it's a total fantasy about adaptation, what's your ultimate fantasy? What book you would love to adapt, even if you think it's impossible, but you'd love to do it? What would it be? One total fantasy.
C'est marrant parce que pardon.
Interestingly enough, until now, I consider that some novels cannot be adapted, like 100 Years of Solitude, Cien Años de Soledad of Garcia Marquez, because it's so rich that there's no way you can put it on a screen, because it would be a waste if you cut it, because the power of the book is its richness. I think in cinema it's still impossible, but now I'm thinking, as the formats are changing and what's called the mini-series, so it's a film in 4 or 6 hours, like unorthodox. I'm wondering if that would not work. You know that unorthodox is also an adaptation. Some books that I considered unadaptable until now, maybe they could be adapted now thanks to these new formats. Maybe not in cinema, but in different formats. Okay, so 100 Years of Solitude by Garcia Marquez. Yeah, sure, why not? Let's dare. I don't know. I think everything can be adapted because you can always choose a point of view. But which one would you dream of? What would be really the perfect, the ideal book for you? I'm going to say Proust, like everyone. This has been done before. Yes, it's been done many times, at least in theater. Valikovsky has done it in Polish. Raúl Ruiz. What's beautiful, especially Simple Passion, for instance, would be interesting to see other adaptations. for me, it's just a way of greeting Danielle, of paying tribute to her. But the book is so rich that it can be seen from other books of yours. So it would be interesting to have different approaches of the same book. So for you, it would be Proust. Yes, until now I've done whenever I wanted to do. And I hadn't had this idea of adapting another book. Now I'm working on a beautiful book called Burning Castles. It's not for my next film, but the following one. And I'm really happy to do this adaptation of a young writer. And you, Jessica? The one I'm writing now. Oh, that's an easy one. This portrayal of an actress in the 70s is really something I find very thrilling, and I'm looking forward to shooting it. But a book that has this reputation of being impossible to adapt isn't the one role of something that you find just impossible to reach, to adapt. Pasolini had done it with many books that had this reputation. Well, you must have this. Yeah, I must be very fond of this book, but I have no grail. The one I'm writing now is really the one. It's good to be focused on your book, and this book is absolutely beautiful by Vanessa Schneider. Thank you very much, Jessica. Thank you. Enjoy your writing. Thank you, Danielle. Also, we'll let you go back to your work, and Laurent. So we know that you're preparing a series out of Garcia Marquez novel. Not at all. That was a fantasy. Are you working on something now? I have one film that's already written that I should shoot next spring, and then I'm working on a new project with Fab Caro again. Is it an original piece or? Yeah, it's original. Thank you very much. Thank you to UniFrance, to Le Point for this event, and also thank you to the translator who's been interpreting this panel into English. And so you were able to follow it all over the world. Thank you very much, and hoping to see you soon. Bye-bye. Thank you.